Hi, and welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Pleasure to have you here on today's program. To every tribe, the mission exists to extend the worship of Christ among all peoples by mobilizing the church, training disciple makers, and sending missionary teams to plant churches among the unreached. Today, we're going to talk to the founder and president to Every Tribe Mission. It is David Sitton. David, welcome to Memphis. Welcome to Bot Radio Network.
Thank you, brother. So good to be with you.
Got an email from my friend David Sitton, similar name, exact name actually. And of course, David just has a heartbeat for ministry and missions and is constantly bringing stuff to my attention in the way of world evangelism, missionaries, and he's involved with a company that's quite mission active. And so I love David Sitton. And he sent me an email and said, hey, there's another David Sitton who is the director of this ministry to Every Tribe. And he's in town. And if you have opportunity for an interview, would you like to meet him? And most certainly, if I can ever work a schedule to invite a missionary in, I'm all about it, David, because I like the opportunity to expose our listeners to what God's up to around the world.
Well, that's excellent. Looking forward to this.
Story continues. Last night I received a call from another BOT employee in Branson, Missouri, Mana Stafford, who you have a friendship with, have for a number of years. And she said, hey, Byron, I heard that my friend David Sitton is going to be on your radio program.
All the way back to the 80s, friends with Mana.
Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, what do most Christians living in the United States not understand about world missions?
The extent of the unreached peoples in the world. 3 billion people on the planet live within cultures and languages where there's no knowledge of Christ. Maybe even the word Jesus is not in even the vocabulary of the people. 30-40% of the world lives in places where they are born, they live, and they die, and they never hear a credible witness for the gospel.
You started out as a rebellious surfer dude, I understand.
Yes, sir.
What was the turning point for you specifically where the reality of Jesus Christ came into your life?
Well, isn't it always girlfriends?
Was it really a girlfriend?
It was indeed. A witness of this dear sister dragged me off of a surfing beach in Corpus Christi and just radically, through her witness, came to understand the gospel. A few months later, I'm in a missionary training school, not even knowing what a missionary is, but just knowing that I wanted to get into the scripture. And they brought through that school a series of missionaries. And that's how I began to hear about the world. My worldview was changed and challenged by a specific missionary. 1977, went to New Guinea for the first time.
That's interesting because I have a similar story. Didn't go to New Guinea, but I went to Guam as a missionary with a group called Trans World Radio. And it was in Bible college where I was exposed to a variety of missionaries who would come from all over the world. But I had a leaning toward radio. I started in this business back when I was 14 years old. So it's interesting to see how God used that in a way to go serve him to reach Northeast and Southeast Asia through broadcasting.
It's all networking.
Yeah.
And challenge from one generation to the next. That's how it happens largely.
As you mentioned, you went to New Guinea for your first experience. What was that cross-cultural experience like when you first met? What were some of the, first of all, expectations you had? And what was the reality of your expectations when you got there?
Well, the reality, because I had a great mentor, the guy that challenged me for New Guinea in the first place, had already warned me that there are cannibals and headhunters in New Guinea. We're going to be going on 4 or 5 day walks through swamps and jungles and mountains. And so I knew what was coming. What I didn't fully understand was the orientation when I got to New Guinea. First day in that orientation, he pushed forward a piece of paper that said burial form. He had me sign a burial form. And he was laughing when he gave it to me. And he said, brother, I told you back there in Texas, we're going to be going to cannibals, headhunters, walking days into the jungles and mountains. You might die on the trail or be killed when we get there. And he's laughing. And he says, I'm not going to haul your carcass back to the coast. But the important point that he was making, he was laughing again, always laughing about these kinds of things. This is how I cut my teeth, really, on this sort of reckless, abandon, go for it, lay your life down for Jesus kind of a mentality and mission. But he said, if it ever happens that you or I are killed or we die in the bush somewhere, the other one should stand over the grave and laugh and say, Jesus is worth it. And that's just the DNA sort of that was planted within me from the very first day, that regardless of the hardship, regardless of what it may cost, Jesus is worth it.
So he really prepared you in advance for any fears or concerns you might have when getting there.
He did. He much like Jesus in that way. That's one of the things I love about Jesus. You know, when he calls us to discipleship, he doesn't, he lays it out for us right up from the beginning, what it's about. You don't find out later from Jesus that there's some small print hidden away somewhere. And it was the same way with this mentor.
What about some of those first initial encounters and experiences when you got there? I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, Joe Cannon, that was the mentor, he already had a tribe in mind. It was the Kuka tribe way back up into the mountains of New Guinea.
These are a real people group.
A real people group, a people group that was feared throughout their mountain range. They were practicing cannibals. They would kill men, women, children, burn villages, rape women, and they would put warriors on a rotisserie and cook them like pigs. Animism is maybe a word you're familiar with. It just means the worship of spirits, and particularly ancestor spirits. So they would eat these warriors as a show of praise almost to the ancestral spirits who gave them victory in warfare.
Which, David, is, totally satanic worship, isn't it?
Absolutely. But one of the things, interestingly, that they believed about cannibalism, they believed that if they ate a warrior from another tribe, that they would receive that person's courage, strength, wisdom, other attributes. So if you just speed forward a little bit to when they receive the gospel and think of the day when they are believers, and I'm introducing to them the concept of communion. And I don't know if you have ever read John chapter 6 to a cannibal before. In that text, Jesus says, "He that does not eat my flesh and drink my blood has no part with me." And so, obviously, cannibalism is a wicked thing. It's got to be rooted out of the culture. But interesting how the Lord uses even a wicked thing such as cannibalism to even reveal something precious about himself to the people.
So they quite understood that then.
They did, that everything that Christ is, they can receive that through communion and that kind of close fellowship with him.
Now I want to back up. After this cannibalistic experience among this tribe of people, the Choo-Choo people, you said?
The Kuka.
Oh, the Kuka.
Yes.
Okay, the Kuka. You came back to the United States around 1980, I believe.
Yes.
That's when you met, courted, and married Tommy Ann Moses. Also, I noticed that your wedding was the first ever performed at the Chapel by the Sea on South Padre Island, which I've been there before. We did some vacation Bible school off the island many, many years ago with our church group. So I've been there. I've been by the church, and so I know where this area is.
Excellent.
Was Tommy equally mission-minded and ready to conquer these cannibal people as you were when you got married?
Well, she was. Lord had prepared her. I came back from New Guinea after 2 years knowing two things, basically. Number one, I've got to get back to New Guinea as quickly as possible. But number two, I've got to be married. You know, I've had enough of it single. I need a wife. And so I'm praying, Lord, give me a wife.
Was it also a cultural thing that it would have maybe been advantageous for you to go back to these people group with a wife?
It would be helpful. Yeah. The Kuka tribe, actually, after they came to Christ, the chiefs offered me, in appreciation for bringing the gospel to them, he throws his hand out like this and he said, "You can have the pick of any 3 of my 8 daughters."
That was an honor.
It's an honor, but I think I'll look for one in Texas.
Yeah. How did you meet Tommy? Other than was it just a freak accident, or was it obviously it was divinely planned? I know that.
Always providence.
Sure.
I was 22, 2 years in New Guinea, 22 years of age now, speaking at this little church at a youth group, and at the end, the fellow that put on this youth camp asked me the question. He said, "Well, brother, what are your needs?" And I said, "Well, I need a wife." And, everybody laughs. And, most of the people there were 16, 17, 18 years old. 2 days later, I got a letter from a 17-year-old girl. And she said, "If you ever get back to this town, which was Harlingen, Texas. You come talk to me. I've always wanted to be a missionary. So that was the clearest, lead from the Spirit of God I think I'd ever heard. So I'm driving back, the 2 hours to get back to Harlingen, not even knowing if she was the blonde or the brunette or, or the dark-haired girl.
Or she even had teeth or not. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We had 2 dates. She was 17. Her dad said, well, she can get married, but you got to at least let her finish high school. So she graduated in May from high school, first wedding in June at the Chapel by the Sea, and went to New Guinea in September and been coming and going ever since.
David, that's a great story. Isn't that like God to meet our needs in just a special way like that?
I don't recommend necessarily the way, but it does show that when the Lord wants to do something with you, He wants to get you where He wants you in the harvest, He will get it done.
And you make a great point, too, because so many young people and single people today, are they play this dating game, and in and out of relationships and the broken hearts and everything. I mean, truly, I think if you focus on the intentional will of God and surrender to that and make yourself available to Him, He will provide and meet that need in His timing.
He does. You move your feet in obedience forward, and He's going to give you everything you need to get you where He needs you and wants you in the harvest.
What are some of the biggest challenges in mobilizing the church to engage the world in this missions update this mission mandate that we've been given?
Sadly, one of the concerns that I have about our cultural Christianity is that we are largely characterized by fear, when we should be characterized by courage and by aggressive advance of the name of Jesus. And I say that about the Christianity in general, but even in the mission world, with mission agencies and missionaries, you hear stories of mission agencies, for instance, bringing their missionaries home from Mexico because they are afraid of the drug cartels, or missionaries who are in Muslim situations when persecution breaks out. The mission back home has evacuation policies that requires the missionaries to return back home. And we are just the opposite. And again, I cut my teeth on a different generation and a different mindset, that it's reckless abandon. We just, we liken it to the military. I want the right kind of missionaries. I want General MacArthur and Patton and Jimmy Doolittle type missionaries, those who will go and at any cost take a beach. And the same mentality as we go into these places, regardless of how dangerous it is, that we're going to stay there till we get the job done for Christ in a place, because Jesus is worth it. He's worth what? He's worth everything. And I don't believe that there's a line that we can draw and say Jesus is worth everything up to this line, but beyond that, He's not worth that anymore. If we draw a line like that, we're actually showing where our idolatry begins, that something has taken the place of Christ. And so I'm concerned, about the fear that seems to paralyze the American or the Western church.
To Every Tribe is obviously mobilizing missionary families. I've been to the website, and I love the little video clip where you've got different, singles and families and couples just sharing their heart, and you can just sense their enthusiasm, to being an agent of the gospel of Christ in these unreached peoples. But I know there has to be a lot of preparation, for them, because you were prepared ahead of time, and so that's given you a heart to do the same. What are some of the intentional things you do to prepare your missionaries to go to these unreached places?
I want to be like my mentor was with me. I want to be very honest about what's going to take place when these young millennial families, in their 20s, most of them, with their young wives and their young children, landing on some shore somewhere to try to get the gospel to an unreached and probably hostile people. Take them through a process of reckoning with fear, because, I've just criticized the fear, but fear is very real. We all have fear. Any missionary that tells you that he's not been afraid is a liar. And I know that the Apostle Paul even had fear. He did, because he wrote Ephesians. And we know that in Ephesians, he asked the believers, he said, pray for me that I would have courage, that I would proclaim the gospel as I ought. So you can have fear, but you need to develop the resource in order to be able to fight through the fear. And that's faith, but how do you get the faith? And just the raw question, how do I overcome the fear? I'm taking my little babies into a place where they could be killed. How do we deal with the fear? And the only way that I know is that you make Jesus so big that the bigger he gets in your heart and in your affections, the smaller that your fears become.
Yeah.
And that's I don't know any other way. Read Hebrews 11. I mean, and look at the exploits of those heroes of faith. It's Acts 20:24. I consider, Paul said, my life worth nothing to me in comparison with Jesus, in comparison with the gospel and getting it to the unreached peoples. In comparison to that, my precious life means nothing to me. And that includes the lives of our children, because Jesus is worth it. He's either worth it or he's not. And there are no safe places anymore to take the gospel. Every place is dangerous. Memphis is dangerous. And, we'll jump into frozen lakes to rescue someone, and we'll consider that to be worth the giving up of our lives. Well, what about taking the gospel to the unreached? Is that worth our lives as well?
David, there are some that would say, are there really, really unreached peoples today with all the technology that we have around us in the world today? Are there really people living as remotely and as primitive that truly haven't heard the gospel of Christ in these places?
There are. One estimate is that there are 7,693 unreached people groups. Nobody knows for sure. I mean, that's an estimate. But there are thousands of them. They're in the Hindu world, in the Muslim world, the Buddhist world, the tribal world. I could take you onto just that one island of New Guinea that I know best. There's 880 different tribes in that one country, 880 languages, days and days walk, hacking through jungles and swamps. There are places way back in those jungles where they have not yet heard the name of Jesus even once.
What have been some of the cultural adaptations in the style of worship, say music, where unreached peoples respond to the gospel and start their own community churches? I think this would be interesting.
Well, and it's critical in terms of our strategy of how we reach them. You shouldn't. Missionaries should not have the mentality that we're just going to take a Western view of Christianity and transplant it onto New Guinea or some other soil somewhere around the world.
It's not like a U.S. church box kit that you just take and transplant.
But that's what we do.
Yeah.
And if you listen to many missionary reports or look at their films, I had this friend of mine who worked in Ethiopia. You look at his pictures, he's got his national brothers who are leaders with their white shirts, black ties, long sleeve shirts in Ethiopia, 120-degree heat. You look at the church buildings, American-style buildings with pulpits and pews, and they're singing Amazing Grace. Maybe they've translated it into the local dialect, but it's Amazing Grace nonetheless. And a better way, I think, would be to what we want to produce New Guinea New Testament churches. And that means it has to be enculturated into all of the beauty and the language and the diversity, the dance, the music of their own people. And so you raise them up and encourage them to write their own songs of worship, to implement their own styles, their own dance. And it's going to, my mentor told me, if you plant a church that you're really, really comfortable with as a Westerner, you probably haven't planted a very good one, because it's probably a whole lot too much like the one you came from back in America.
David, I was just thinking, though, about the beauty of the reflection of this cultural infusion, and just it must be incredible to see this in action.
It's incredible, and it's a little insight into what it's going to be in heaven. I mean, what language are we going to speak in heaven? All of them. God is going to be worshiped, I believe, with all of the languages and all of the beautiful diversity and cultural, attributes and characteristics of every single people group that he ever made. That was his plan from the beginning, to have a people drawn out from all of the peoples. And he's doing that. He says in Malachi, my name will be great among the nations. There's certainty to that. That's not hope so. Jesus is not wringing his hands, wondering, how am I going to get the gospel into North Korea? He's not worried about it. He's going to get this job done. We are on a mission of the gospel that cannot fail. It is impossible for the gospel to not succeed. And so we should be the ones on the attack. We should be the ones with aggression and courage, love and humility, but no compromise, and moving forward with this message of Christ.
We see, of course, more of this radical, what some are calling radical Muslim actions in the ISIS terrorist activities, beheadings, and a recent video posted recently of an ISIS child doing a beheading. And we have obviously. It's in our human nature, we can fear that we're fearful of those things.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
The 29 Coptic Egyptians that had their heads chopped off onto that beach a few months ago, when you saw the pictures of that, what did you think? Did you view those heads laying on the beach? Did you view them, those brothers, as victims or as victors? Which way?
Well, they were truly victors.
They were, but we don't normally think of it that way.
Yeah.
And so Jesus came as a lamb to be slain. He did not come as a marine with strength. He came, he was slaughtered, and it was through weakness and death that he conquered. Then he turns to us and he says, now I'm sending you as the Father has sent me, as lambs among wolves. The Muslim world is not going to be won without bloodshed, but it's not going to be their bloodshed. It's going to be our bloodshed.
Yeah.
That's how I believe God has purposed to advance his kingdom through weakness, and if I can say the word, martyrdom. The gospel spreads the fastest and the best in places where it is opposed and persecuted the most.
Has there been to every tribe missionaries to be martyred?
Not yet, but we know that they will be, and that's not even difficult to predict when you look at the places where we're sending our missionaries. And I want to be like my mentor, that when it happens, I'm going to grieve over the families, but I'm going to stand back and I'm going to laugh and I'm going to rejoice, because the blood of the martyrs always gains its reward, its harvest.
It's not a loss.
It's not a loss. To live as Christ and to die as gain. Do we believe that? I tell our missionaries, the worst thing that can happen to you when you go into the Muslim world as a missionary, the worst thing that can happen is you come back alive. The best thing that could happen to you might be some tribal chief chopping your head off and sending you airmailing you straight to heaven. Do we really believe that? Well, if you do, it's gonna change the way that you live your life. And you're not going to shrink back in fear every time somebody raises a machete over your head.
David, our few moments remaining, I'd like to address a couple of areas, and that would be to someone who is listening to this broadcast right now and says, I've been praying. I really believe God wants me engaging in world missions and possibly reaching unreached peoples. What should be my first step? What should I do?
One of the first things, I hope you'll contact us, toeverytribe.org, and just get in touch with us. We have a 2-year training school where we take you through a process of going through these difficult things. We have entire courses on suffering, persecution, and martyrdom, and why it happens, and how it happens, and God's purpose in it. We teach theology and missiology, and we form teams, and we target unreached places so that through the process of 2 years, you can be with us, and we can take you from knowing very little about mission to being on a team and being ready to engage an unreached people group within 2 to 3 years.
And this includes families too.
Preferably families, but young men and young women as well.
Yeah. David, should I feel less committed to Christ if I don't travel to unreached people groups of the world? Are there other ways I can be involved without traveling to these faraway places?
Absolutely. We are on a mission that cannot fail. We are all a part of the mission. Now, we're not all missionaries. We don't all go, but we're all a part of the mission, either going, sending, giving, interceding in some kind of way. There's no such thing as an uncalled missionary or an uncalled Christian to the mission. There's no such thing as that. And so I'm trying to mobilize everyone to be vitally involved in the mission in one of these kinds of ways. Be a martyr to go. If you're not going to go, be a martyr to give. Be a martyr in your praying. I believe that we should be called to lay it out all the way for Jesus Christ in order to get his name advanced in these places.
And we talk about prayer. How can we most effectively pray for missionaries other than that typical God, please bless the missionaries?
Well, we'll take the God bless all the missionaries wherever they are in the world, amen. We'll take that. But there's actually on our website a fairly extensive free ebook on warfare prayer. And it breaks down the different areas where missionaries struggle in family and their spiritual lives in just all kinds of practical ways. And that resource, and there's others, will help you to pray more specifically.
You brought a couple of books, and you've written, what, 2, 3 books?
3 books.
Three
yes.
books? And tell me the books you've written.
Well, the main one here is called Reckless Abandon.
Hold that up to our camera. We're actually videotaping for YouTube, too, for our radio listeners can go later and watch our interview with David. But Reckless
Abandon. And it's all about this mindset of throw caution to the wind. Jesus is worth it. Go lay your life out for the advance of his name in the most hostile places. Another book, actually, this missionary, Joe Cannon, my mentor, I just completed this book, Hard Fighting Soldier. And he was in mission for 65 years. And he's actually buried probably 10 miles from the studio here, right here in Memphis.
My.
So 65 years. He died at 83.
And a third book?
The third one actually was my first one, called To Every Tribe with Jesus, which basically shows the tribal worldview and strategies for how you approach unreached tribal peoples.
Listeners can go to the website, toeverytribe.org, toeverytribe.org, and pick up information, watch videos. You also have a blog, I believe.
We do. I'm a ministry blog. Yes.
So there's
it's all right there on the
great
on the
resources.
website.
Also, you can probably purchase these books online.
You can.
Okay.
Everything's right there.
David, God bless you, my dear brother. Thank you for what you're doing to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ and for his kingdom to unreached peoples all over the world, and mobilizing people, fellow followers of Christ, to do the same, and also for stopping by and sharing passionately your heart with us today.
Well, you're so welcome, brother, and thank you for having me.
Again, friend, go to that website, toeverytribe.org, to get more details. Now, would you also be available for speaking engagements?
Absolutely. Again, through the website, contact us, give me an invitation. Be happy to come.
All right. Friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint, and I do appreciate you stopping by. I'm Byron Tyler. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.